Being a CRO is so much more than closing deals. You have to have a very holistic vantage point. You have to be data driven. You might not even be the best salesperson at the company, honestly, but you have to be the best scientist and investigative journalist. The third thing that people forget about is general leadership. Really focusing on the outcomes you're driving for your customers and shouting them from the rooftops as loud as you can, I think is critical.
It's all about getting our customers to love us, cross-sell, upsell, etc.
You have to de-risk trying your solution. You have to make it not scary for your buyer to go out on a limb and try something new and recommend something new and put their name against something new into their company.
I feel like people make the decision for the personal win, and then they have to justify it with the ROI.
Focus on the outcome you want to achieve and really think about the actions and behaviors you're doing now as it compares to that outcome, because what feels most natural to do is not going to get you the outcome you want to achieve.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Hello, go-to-market leaders. If you're like me, you're probably feeling the AI FOMO. You're certainly not alone. And that's why HG Insights created the next generation of sales AI report to calm the FOMO and help you bring AI to your go-to-market teams. It includes a breakdown of the sales AI landscape, the adoption of Gen AI and sales software across different buyer groups, plus an analysis of the top 75 trending sales AI tools. And why HG Insights? Pretty simple. They've been writing market reports for years as the pioneer of tech adoption and market insights. And they are trusted by go-to-market leaders at the likes of Snowflake, Five9, Google Cloud to help improve go-to-market efficiency. So if you're thinking about AI for your sales team but unsure where to start, this free and ungated report has got you covered. Check out the link in the show notes. Now on with the show. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the GTM podcast. As always, you got Scott Barker here. Appreciate you lending us your eardrums for the next 45 minutes or so. As always, we're going to dive deep into everything go-to-market, help you with some tips, strategies, and stories for helping you grow your tech business. And we have a fantastic guest to do just that. I am joined by Allison Metcalfe. Allison, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Super excited to have you on. And super quickly for the listeners, got to do the bio. So Allison has had an incredible career in tech, currently the CRO at Cloudinary, and is really kind of a data-driven go-to-market leader. And it was interesting because you've had quite a non-traditional path sort of to the C-suite, which we can get into a little bit later, but started in account management and really then became a leader in the evolution of the customer success function, which now, in my opinion, is more and more important than ever as it's harder to get net new customers in the door. It's all about, getting our customers to love us, cross-sell, upsell, etc. And you've also held a variety of leadership roles across sales and operations in really some of the most notable, names across the valley, companies like Jigsaw, acquired obviously by Salesforce, Demandbase, huge fans of Demandbase. They're often a partner and sponsor on this very podcast. Quotient, that is public on the New York Stock Exchange. LiveRamp as well, again, public. And they went from 30 mil to 500 mil in revenue and IPO under your tenure, which is wild. I always ask this question when I have guests like you should be in venture capital. You're certainly picking winners. How did you go about, finding and joining all of these great companies that had these great outcomes?
I wish I had a better answer that was more sophisticated, because it's funny when I've talked to my more fancily educated friends, like my friends that went to Ivy League schools and had MBAs, Ivy Leagues educations, and they'd talk about how they picked the companies they went to. Very different thought process. I mean, I can tell you, I've really chosen where I've gone based on what I'm optimizing for, one. So that could either be experience or seniority or industry or what have you. But this sounds like a Pollyanna answer, but I've really gone with my gut in terms of how I felt about the people. LiveRamp, when I joined LiveRamp, it was actually, I think it was 20 million in revenue. Just as an example, Oren Hoffman apparently was pretty well known. He's the founder of LiveRamp, all around Silicon Valley. Even at the time, he was well known. I had never heard of him. No one had heard of LiveRamp. I thought the people were really smart. And I was like, man, I could see myself being in the trenches with these people for the next 3 to 5 years. Like the gentleman who ended up being my boss, James Zara, we went out to breakfast when I was in the interview process, and I really appreciated how he treated the waitress. So it's like, I have to say, I wish I had a better, answer, but I've really gone with my gut. I've chosen to based on the people that are at the companies and how I felt about my interest level in working with them. And it's just not guided me wrong for the most part. So I've been lucky in that regard, but I've been very people driven, um, versus anything else, to be honest with you.
Yeah. People driven, I'm reminded again and again, is the people build great businesses at the end of the day. And, even as an investor, like I always try and over engineer and over analyze and put new things in our deal memos and go through this extensive, IC and second ICs. And oftentimes when you look historically, at least at our portfolio, it's like, it's the people, it's the founder, it's the teams that are working on it. And it's pretty simple who's going to find success because people find ways in difficult times to win. And shout out Oren Hoffman. He's a friend of the fund, and we're actually looks like we'll be closing in on a deal together. So we'll be
Oh,
sharing
that's great.
a cap table here soon. Still,
Here's a funny story about Oren Hoffman. Oren Hoffman, and I'm sure he has some data different way about this, but every year on my birthday, I get an email from him the night before saying happy birthday. He knows how old I mean, he's just a lovely guy. And like I've interviewed at a lot of companies that have gone on to be bangers, right? Have gone on to really successful. I remember being at those companies and just not liking the vibe and not liking how you can feel the culture. It's hard to explain. But I just, yeah, I don't know. I think life is really short to work with people that don't share your values. And so I do believe that it is, again, kind of a Pollyanna answer. But if you can find people that share your values, who you think are smarter than you and who seem to be good people, I find that good outcomes come from that.
amen. Amen. All right. So as Cloudinary's first CRO, you are doing everything. You're building their full kind of go-to-market strategy. What I think the CRO function is treated a little bit differently across different organizations. What all rolls up to you?
Pretty much everything external. So everything from so I guess to oversimplify, I have all of marketing. So, demand gen, corporate marketing, brand marketing all rolls into me under an SVP of marketing. Our SDR function also rolls into her. Net new logo, post sale. I don't have customer success today. We have a chief customer officer who manages the customer success function. But post sale, i.e., renewal, upsell, does roll into my function, to my group. Partnerships, channel, and alliances. Um, I'm sure I'm gonna forget somebody. So I would say everything go to market except customer success proper rolls into me, including marketing. That might be the easiest way to say it.
Got it. Makes sense. And I like that the BD function rolls into marketing. I know that's kind of hotly debated, but I've been squarely in that camp for a long time. There's so much just insights that the BD function can derive from being on the front lines that can inform so much positioning, messaging, like just a lot. So I like when it's structured that way. So an interesting thing about Cloudinary is you kind of made this transition from purely product-led growth, and now you're also supporting like this high-functioning enterprise sales motion. What was that transition like? I feel like a lot of folks are trying to make that transition right now.
And it's a hard transition. And I would, I'm not ready to unfurl the mission accomplished banner on that whatsoever. And Cloudinary did start the SLG motion on top of the PLG motion before my tenure. So the company's been doing this for, I'd say, 5 years or so before I joined. But it's challenging. And I do think one thing that we need to think about more at Cloudinary, and we're working on this too, is thinking about the PLG motion as an extension of the SLG motion versus two completely separate funnels. And it's interesting because I actually reflect on a company that I was at, Jigsaw, way back in the day. Only certain people of certain hair color, gray hairs, will will remember Jigsaw. But Jigsaw was PLG before PLG had a name, right? Because Jigsaw was a B2B contact database, and individual salespeople could log into Jigsaw and then, start using it on their own. And then we also sold enterprise agreements to companies, typically to sales ops or VPs of sales or what have you. And what was really, really critical to us was the self-service motion, or the PLG motion. We didn't call it that at the time. That was kind of natural self-qualifying pipeline for us, right? Because people were starting to use it on their own. And so you really had to start to think about, if you get enough critical mass of individual users at a certain organization, how can you then, up level that conversation to a more senior person that is the user buyer and the economic buyer of the folks that are actually using the tool. And so that is something that we're continuing to work on. So I really see the PLG motion that's our bread and butter. Like, that's still like our most strategic asset, that people will go onto cloudinary.com and sign up and pay for it on their own, right? Without any sales cycle, without ever talking to a salesperson. So it's really, it's gold. And I always tell Cloudinary, people that have been at Cloudinary for a long time sometimes forget how special that is and how lucky we are that we have this kind of self-funding, self-generating pipeline. Now, of course, what we've had to do to add on to that is build out a sales-led motion and an outbound motion on top of that, kind of a top-down motion that complements the bottom-up motion. And I think what's been really, really important to us is not taking our eye off the ball of the end user, who for us is the developer. We're an API first, developer first solution. We always need to keep in mind that we serve the developer. Now, with a caveat, we are expanding into other end users, but the developer will always be really, really important, if not the most important end user to Cloudinary. So I guess net, this is kind of the story with all growth, I think. Even when I think about LiveRamp, what was really important when we started crossing 100 million in revenue, whatever, was not losing sight of your core and not getting really distracted and excited about the next big thing, and not abandoning your base or your core. That's really, really important. So we spend a lot of time talking about that, making sure that our developers are happy and that we're building products with the end user in mind, not just the economic buyer in mind.
Yeah. I think there was a couple things there. And one is, I feel like that's such a common mistake that I see software companies make, is forgetting their core and forgetting their core customers, right? There's so much you gain this velocity, many times it's SMB mid-market that gets you there. And then all of a sudden you look at this monster number you have to hit next year, and you're like, okay, we can only get there with, adding these big logos, and we got to go enterprise. And then you start building and your whole motion changes to support this enterprise. And then your SMB mid-market customers are left like, are we forgotten about? And then that leaves this, vacuum for a competitor who's going to serve that market. And then you quickly realize, oh, wow, that was 60% of our ARR. Maybe we should give them some serious love.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because while I totally agree, the inverse or the converse or whatever can be true as well. Because one of the things that when you move from PLG and you move into enterprise, or businesses versus end users only, it's interesting because you can be what's the word? You can be surprised or taken off guard by adoption could be there, but the churn might still happen, because the end users might be happy, but your competitor might be having a better and more sophisticated conversation with the economic buyer. who's talking about business outcomes or what have you. And that's happened to me. I've been burned. I have stories. I have brands and brands that are ingrained in my brain of like, this brand story, that brand story, where we thought we were so good. We had so much adoption. The end users were happy, but the competitor was talking to the economic buyer and in a different way and better than we were. And the client ultimately ended up churning. So it's a balancing act, right? You can't abandon your end users. You got to make sure they're good. But the tricky part when you go into the enterprises, there's the buying committee now, right? It's not just the end user. There's all these different stakeholders that can influence the decision regardless of how the end users feel about it. So it's definitely a tricky balance. And it's one that a lot of companies I think struggle with. And that's why post sale is so dear to my heart, because I think people misunderstand or don't appreciate the complexity of that part of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you so I hear you on this balance and this, you've got this bottoms up and then, top down approach. What does that look like in reality at Cloudinary? So let's say you identify that there is a good, let's say Snowflake, you have 11 users at Snowflake that are using the product. And you can see by their usage, like, oh wow, like they're getting a lot of value from it. What would be the plan of attack from there? Would the BDRs try and reach out to those users? Would CS try and reach out to those users, build a deeper relationship with them, try and get intros? Or would you use that as a signal for the AE to start trying to go have higher level conversations? Or is that all happening in tandem?
So it's kind of both. And I will say that this is something that we're working on really actively right now. So the question is very relevant because we can do better here. But the way that Cloudinary's self-service or PLG motion works is it starts with freemium, and then there's different levels that you can kind of upgrade along your journey. And you might reach a certain point where, you need customer success, you need stronger support, and you need more as an enterprise. And so it makes sense to kind of move away from the self-service experience at Cloudinary into the enterprise experience at Cloudinary. And so a couple of things are happening there, right? Some clients will self-qualify, which is wonderful and beautiful, right? We see a lot of inbound come through Cloudinary that are actually existing self-service customers that are just needing more from us, and they're ready to kind of to move into a different level of engagement with us. We also do have SDRs and sale. Like what in my perfect world, SDRs are looking at what we call commercially viable at self-service customers, because not all of our self-service customers I would consider commercially viable. They might be a hobbyist. They might be a student who's using our solution. There's lots of different reasons why they would never be appropriate for us to become an enterprise customer. So we're doing a lot of work now to make sure that we can raise those signals early on to our SDRs, like, hey, this is a domain that is affiliated with our ICP. They should, we believe they should be an enterprise customer. So how can we kind of not pull them out, but start reaching out to them in the enterprise fashion to kind of get them to the next level. And I think, and so there's a little bit of both happening. SDRs are kind of, I call it fishing in the self-service pond. AEs are dipping into that. But we also have, like I said, the beautiful thing is we also have quite a lot of self-service customers who are self-selecting and asking to kind of be upgraded as well. So we have lots of different things happening there. But I will stress, I don't think we're perfect there. We have a lot of work to do to operationalize fishing in our own self-service pond today. I'd give us kind of like a C+ on that. There's a lot of opportunity where we can improve.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like that playbook is still being written, which is cool to be able to come at it from almost like first principles and write the playbook of the future for this kind of PLG to enterprise sales motion. Beyond this transition, any kind of go-to-market challenges that you're being faced with right now?
Oh, well, certainly. So I would say this is actually one kind of, how do we figure out the best way to operationalize? Because I will say the domains that are in the self-service pond, so one of the challenges could be, you might sign up for our self-service solution and you might work at Cisco or, Adidas or something, but you're probably going to sign up with your Gmail account, right? And so how can we figure out, oh my gosh, this is actually a group of people that would actually be very appropriate for our enterprise motion? That can be hard to discern. I think another one is Cloudinary is a very technical solution. Again, very developer first, API first. And what the PLG motion is just serving that end user, bringing that up into the enterprise, having that concept of the buying committee is a newer concept to Cloudinary, and making sure that we have a message and a story to tell to the economic buyer, the technical buyer, the user buyer, and not just the end user. So, you know, figuring that story out and getting that strategy deployed is something that we're actively working on right now. I think the other thing is the market has changed. Like Cloudinary used to and it still does. Cloudinary literally does sell itself. People buy it on their own. A lot of demos lead to sales very, very quickly. But the market has changed, right? The market has changed such that we're in a non-SERP environment. There's something Matt Dixon, who wrote the Challenger Sale, he wrote a new book called The Jolt Effect that really resonates with me. He talks about this concept of FOMO, which is fear of messing up versus fear of missing out. And that really resonates with me, in that seeing the number of deals that are being paused, interestingly, not necessarily lost, but paused due to status quo, right? Like, I don't want to take a risk on a new thing. It's safer to just continue doing what we're doing now, and kind of painting that art of the possible picture is a challenge for us. It's just a harder market, and Cloudinary is not immune to those challenges. I'd say the other thing I'm thinking a lot about right now is verticalization and specialization. So talking about what Cloudinary does, it's the same product, but the outcome, the success metrics for a retail or e-commerce provider versus a media company versus a financial services company are very different. And I think, at LiveRamp, we actually started that verticalization or specialization in post-sale. It was really successful. It became so successful that we decided to dismantle all functional leadership at one point in the favor of a GM structure that was built around those audiences, because it was so successful to specialize and verticalize. So, the kind of generic story is not working anymore, because there's a lot of fear. You have to de-risk trying your solution. You have to make it not scary for your buyer to go out on a limb and try something new and recommend something new and put their name against something new into their company. I don't think those challenges are super unique to Cloudinary, but the ones that we are not immune to, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I really like that idea of breaking down teams by vertical specialization. I think that makes total sense once you get to a certain threshold, as almost having like a mini go-to-market org for each of the verticals that you sell into. Like, how much more valuable is that going to be to your buyer? And you can bring in folks from that vertical as well, and really speak the language of the customer. I like that. And I think I hadn't heard FUMU, but I think that is like such an easy way to encapsulate.
Yeah.
FOMO. Yeah.
Fear of messing up. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. So good. I think that encapsulates like the transition buyers have made when it comes to technology. It was very much FOMO driven before. You're like, okay, I might lose my job if I don't get outreach for my sales team, and now it's, I might lose my job if, I get this new tool and it doesn't work out, just because everything's so much more scrutinized from the top down.
I mean, what's the old expression? Like, no one gets fired for buying IBM, right? I think the new kind of expression is no one gets fired for just not doing anything, right? No one gets fired for just continuing on. And there's just a lot more inherent risk in messing with stuff, even if you think you can make it better. And so that kind of de-risking storytelling about how people that look and act and have the same problems of you have been successful with this, versus highlighting the technical solutions that you solve. It's really human, actually, right? Because you really got to make people. And on the flip side, I'm an old, my sales training predominantly was in Miller Hyman, which was written in the 80s. But there's elements of Miller Hyman that I still carry with me today, that is like the concept of the personal win, right? And there's a story that I tell that it was actually from the Jigsaw days. I had this client who had got on a limb and was going to bring in Jigsaw, and it was a marketing person who was bringing it into the organization. And I'll never forget this conversation, because I said to him, Like, what does success look like? What needs to happen for this to be successful from your point of view to continue the investment and what have you? And he said, I need sales to think marketing is relevant. And because at the time, sales just had no time for marketing at his organization. And I just was like, that's so interesting to me, because that was a really, like, you always think it's going to be like, oh, I need, efficiency to go up X%, or I need this, number to happen. But sometimes the win is subjective and a feeling and a vibe. And making sure that you're understanding, I need to look like a thought leader in my company. I need to be viewed as someone who's bringing in new ideas. Like, those personal wins are just as important as like hard ROI in a lot of instances, and understanding that is really, really important.
Mm. Yeah, totally. I feel like people make the decision for the personal win, and then they have to justify it with the with the ROI, and that getting them aligned with KPIs that they own. And I think that's a great call out. All right, I want to shift gears a little bit. So we love to speak through stories, ideally really impactful stories that people have had throughout their career. So I want to fly you back into a time period where I believe it was your first role at LiveRamp. You were the senior director of CS, and you were really just getting started when you were acquired. Walk me through kind of that experience and how it shaped you and some of the things you learned.
Yeah, it was a wild time. Feels almost like impossible now. But yeah, I joined LiveRamp, I think it was the end of 2013, to build out a post-sale function. They didn't have a post-sale function at the time. This was my third time doing this. I'd kind of done it at Jigsaw, I did it at Demandbase, and now I was going to do it again. And by the way, I thought that was going to be my calling card. Was I come into startups at that tipping point when they need to start building post-sale. Sales can't do everything, and I come in and build that, and that's what I do. And I was going to do that at LiveRamp. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about LiveRamp is we were ecosystem-led growth or partner-led growth. Again, before that was a term, similar to Jigsaw was PLG, before that was a term, LiveRamp was very partner-led growth. We were just getting started on working directly with end customers because we had so many kind of reseller types of relationships. And one of those resellers ended up buying us. That was Acxiom. And that was like 6 months into the job. And Acxiom had been reselling us. They had a practice all on their own of reselling LiveRamp. So they had a sales team. And I should back up. So LiveRamp was 100% digital data, online data, internet stuff. Acxiom was 100% offline, 50-year-old plus company based out of Arkansas. Data management, offline data management for some of the world's biggest brands, still is. And so the culture clash was insane, right? Because you have Arkansas company, average tenure literally is like 20 years. That's the tenure, right? LiveRamp, startup in San Francisco, average age is like 20 years. Like, I was the oldest person, one of the top 5 oldest people. I think I was like 32 or something. And I was like super old there. But so what happened is that we get acquired, and then Acxiom decides to kind of sunset their practice of LiveRamp and which would make sense, and push it to LiveRamp. And so then there was a post-sale organization happening at Acxiom, and that was going to get shifted and combined with what I was doing at LiveRamp. So all of a sudden, our client base like doubled. I was promoted to I was promoted to the executive team for the first time. That was my first foray into joining an executive team, and this is like 2014. Yeah, it all happened very fast. So that was a wild time. And again, we were 20 million in revenue. We were like 30 people. Acxiom was a public company, by the way. So now we were like it was just, I don't know, like, check every like bingo card box you have in terms of like crazy things that could happen. All of that happened in the span of like 2 months. Crazy.
Mhm. Those periods are wild. Yeah, looking back, you kind of often you're just like, how did I get through that? Yeah, I feel like there's periods in my career that I almost just like black out. There's just so much happening, and you're just like one step at a time. What did you learn from that experience, or maybe what would you do differently to make that transition easier?
Yes, I will say one thing. Our CFO at the time, Brian Morris, um, this is just talking about a different time. It was explosive growth. I don't even remember the growth percentages that we were growing. It was like, I don't even know. Certainly more than double. Certainly, I don't triple. It was insane. All of us were fairly new in terms of our positions, except for, Oren had a lot more experience, but the rest of us were relatively newer. James Zara, who was our boss, had been around the block a little bit more. But Brian did get an investment in an executive coach at the time to work with all of us. And that was really critical. It was interesting. I mean, she worked with LiveRamp. She was still working with LiveRamp when I left in 2020. So she had a long tenure. She got very ingrained in the company. This was before that show Billions, but she was almost kind of Billions-esque. Like, she knew all of us and she knew what was going on with everybody, and so that was really critical. The investment in an executive coach, I will say, really, I'd highly recommend that. But one of the mistakes I made, actually backing up, so that culture clash I referenced was really tough, because the other thing was Acxiom, Scott Howe, who was the CEO, who's now the CEO of LiveRamp. He really wanted to isolate LiveRamp, or I guess protect LiveRamp, but depends on what word you want to look at. So he really tried to leave us alone, and silly things like, I just can't believe it's true. Like, they were on Microsoft and we were on Gmail, and or we're not going to use Microsoft. We're going to continue using our G Suite, and we really just continued to operate independently. That ruffled some feathers in a bad way at Acxiom. It was kind of there was kind of a thing that was often said, who acquired who here, right? Because we were certainly not adopting to Acxiom's culture. And I think that was by design at the time. But it definitely ruffled some feathers, and there were some ill feelings there, right? Because LiveRamp looked at Acxiom like, oh, these are dinosaurs and they're old school, and they're not technology driven, and they're this kind of the old school dinosaur thing. And Acxiom looked at LiveRamp like, these are young whippersnappers who don't know what they're doing. These people are the Wild West and they're out of control. And it was tough, right? And so when I was going to take over this post-sale team and incorporate it into my team, I was really desperate to not have that be the feeling from the people that were coming over, right? I didn't want them to feel like there was any kind of, looking down on them or any of that. I was really desperate for that to not to be the case. But my leadership was really pushing me to interview them, basically, to have an interview with all of them, to kind of make sure that they could make it in the make it, air quote, right, in the LiveRamp world. And I was very hesitant to do that. I did not. There was already this kind of, bad vibe between the two cultures, and the last thing I wanted to do was invite these people to join my team and then make them interview to keep their job. Basically, that's how I was worried it would feel. But the problem was, I should have, because it would have been the more compassionate, graceful thing to do for everyone involved, because while they had the same titles as my team, right? So on paper, the titles were the same, and you would think what they were doing was the same, but when you got into it, they were doing wildly different things, right? Acxiom had a much more managed service. Everything's a white glove, we'll do it for you kind of culture. We were very product led. We'll train you, and off you go kind of culture. We were super, super technical. They were far better at us on relationships. But the net was, at least for those first couple of years, the Acxiom way of that post-sale experience didn't jive well with the LiveRamp way. A lot of people that were trying to come over really, really struggled. And I think I did them a disservice. I did, us a disservice. I did everybody a disservice by trying to focus on being super welcoming and inclusive, when I should have been like, hey, let's make sure we can have a really, really explicit expectation management conversation here, just so we're not walking into something that we don't realize is not what we thought, right? And I really should have done that. And so there was a lot of pain that happened in those first 6 months to a year, with folks were coming over and trying to get on board and trying to mesh. And it was probably never going to work in the first place. And I probably could have had some conversations prior to combining the teams that could have avoided that. And so I think, and I think, frankly, this was the biggest job I'd ever had. I was suddenly thrust into this more executive position. I was still very much of the mindset of wanting to be liked, and thought that, I want to be the cool boss. I want to be liked. I want to be chill, whatever. And it was the wrong way. And what I've really taken away from that is this old adage that like the right thing to do is often the hardest thing to do. But when you know that something has to be done and you know it's the right thing to do, it's better to just be super explicit and do it. It ends up being better for everyone. And having those kind of, I don't want to use old Silicon Valley tropes too much, but that kind of radical candor type of conversation can actually be the biggest gift to people, despite how hard it is. And you can do it in a loving way, right? You can say like, hey, Scott, like, listen, I know that it seems like we do the same thing, but I just want to talk to you about how we do things and really run through it in detail. I don't want to set you up for failure. I don't want you to be in a situation where you can't succeed and it's just going to be harder down the road. So let's have that conversation now, right? And I was avoidant of that, and I shouldn't have been. And so that's been a really big lesson for me.
Yeah, you said a few things there, that I definitely resonate with. One is this idea, which I've fallen prey to many times, of just wanting to be liked and then sometimes not having the uncomfortable conversations that need to happen. And ultimately what I found is they will have to happen and they'll just become harder. So it's easier to have them, up front. How did you, like, personally, this is a tough question, but like, how did you kind of overcome that feeling as a leader? Because I think a lot of people can resonate it. You got a lot of young leaders listening to this podcast. Was there a specific moment or thought process, thought experiment that allowed you to get over that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a couple. It's super hard. And by the way, I do think that people think they want to get into leadership and they don't realize that so much of being in leadership is not what they think. It's not what they think it is, right? It's a lot of stuff that you really don't want to do that's unpleasant or not what you think the job is. So anyways, number one, I mean, I watched people that were really good at this. One person who is so good at this stuff is Annika Gupta. She's currently the chief product officer at Rubrik. She started at LiveRamp as an intern, I think. And, she was just one of those such annoying people. She's like super young, but she was just awesome from like the womb. I think she started being awesome from the beginning, but she was always really good at this because she was able to have these conversations in a way that was not aggressive. It wasn't mean. It was always loving. It was like, so the net, I watched other people do it in a really, really good way. I think executive coaching was imperative to me, getting that coaching and practicing like everything else. But I'll also say, and this answer might surprise you, and if anyone who knows me is listening to this, they're going to laugh because I talk about this all the time. But another one of my mentors is this guy, Joel Jewett. Joel was this kind of famous guy in Silicon Valley as well, one of the co-founders of Palm, and he was kind of a strategic BD guy at LiveRamp and became a good friend and mentor of mine. And he talked a lot about this concept of developing a persona. And I don't think I understood it until I read an article about Beyoncé. And so this is the
queen.
But so for someone like interviewing Beyoncé, and she's talking about how she's actually like super shy and introverted. And they were like, gosh, that's so weird because you're on stage and you're Beyoncé. And she was like, talked about how she has a persona. And her persona is Sasha Fierce. And when she's on stage, that's Sasha Fierce. That's not Beyoncé. And so the way that's helpful is like when you're getting feedback or when you're in tough situations or people are mad at you or it's coming at you or what have you, kind of getting the mindset to be there. That's not me. That's not a personal thing about me. They're mad at Sasha Fierce. And so I really do try to keep some separation between me as my human, highly emotional, sensitive person and the person that I have to be able to do my job effectively. And so that kind of combination, right? Watching people do it well, getting a lot of coaching, practicing, doing it wrong a million times. I'm still not perfect at it, but also being able to go into those conversations, knowing that I'm not going to be like thanked and high-fived for it, right? But like being able to take the toughness of it because it's not personal about me and it's something that I have to do. So that's been very helpful. And I think the final thing is the other great advice, the best advice I've ever been given that I think about all the time is to focus on the outcome you want to achieve and really think about the outcome you want to achieve and the actions and behaviors you're doing now as it compares to that outcome. Because oftentimes what feels most natural to do is not going to get you the outcome you want to achieve, right? Like I have so many examples of that, right? Having an emotional response or being angry or being super, critical in an unproductive way might make you feel good in the moment, but will not get you where you want to go. It's not going to solve the problem. So I really do focus myself on that. Trying to be super outcome driven. That's helped me a lot as well.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. Is my behavior and actions in line with the outcome I want, not just the feeling that I might want right now that's going to feel short term good. I have to ask, have you named Allison Metcalfe's Sasha Fierce yet?
I'm super unoriginal, so it's just Sasha Fierce. So I just stole Beyoncé's because I liked it a lot. But I talk about it all the time. I'm like, or it is kind of funny because sometimes my team, once I kind of tell them this, they're like, oh, I'll be in a certain presentation. They're like, oh, that was Sasha Fierce up there. That wasn't you. I'm like, that's true. That's 100% accurate.
I love it. Well, we all need our own Sasha Fierce. All right. I have 3 more questions for you. One actually comes from listeners. So we have a portion of this where listeners can actually send in questions and we could get great ones all the time. And I thought this one was relevant. So I would love to get your thoughts on it. The question is from a founder. It says, my investors are telling me it's time to hire a CRO. Of course, I roughly know the function, but what exactly is the role and skills required of a modern CRO? Big question, broad question. Would love to hear what your thoughts are.
No, I think it's a great question. And I have a lot of energy around this question because I think it's not what people think. So I think where people go wrong, and maybe this is a bit of a self-serving answer, but I think there's a lot of validity to my answer, which is I think where people go wrong is they hire someone who's come up on the sales side of the house their entire career, especially net new logo only. Like a net new logo only salesperson does not make a good CRO. That's just one small piece of the pie. You have to have an understanding of how the entire machine works. And I actually think, despite my non-traditional background coming up in customer success and post-sale, which people really focus on, there was a period of time at LiveRamp after we were public and I had been a GM at a time we had acquired a company and we were now a public company, several hundred millions of revenue on our own. We'd spun out frankly, we were still operating like a startup. And I moved into this role. I think I was like SVP of productivity. I can't even remember. But basically what I did is I came in and built a proper sales excellence program and productivity / enablement program and centralized things and kind of had a stronger blueprint, data-driven blueprint to create what an excellent enterprise go-to-market machine looked like. I took a lot of my experience from Salesforce back in the day, talking to guys like Doug Landis. I'm going to call him out. Doug Landis was a big productivity guy at Salesforce when I was there. I watched and learned.
You love Doug.
Yeah.
Shout out Doug Landis. Great guy.
Him. And I thanked him because I actually, when I took that role, I'll never forget, I pinged Doug Landis. I was like, Doug, I don't know if you remember me. I worked with you at Salesforce. I got this new role. I got a Salesforce-size LiveRamp. Will you talk to me? And he took 30 minutes of his day and he talked to me. And what he and I talked about for those 30 minutes has informed so much of what I've done around, predetermining the KPIs. How will you know you have a high performing machine in these certain functions, leading leadership teams through that conversation prior to execution, right? And it's focusing on leading indicators, not lagging. So if these 5 things happen, then the results will come. And that experience combined with my empathy for customers and my kind of vantage point of seeing things holistically, combined with the fact that I have spent a lot of my time working with marketers, really kind of made this perfect storm where I felt unusually effective to be able to do this job versus people that have only come up on the sales side of the house. All they think about is closing deals. And being a CRO is so much more than closing deals. You have to have a very holistic vantage point. You have to be data driven. You might not even be the best salesperson at the company, honestly, but you have to be the best scientist and investigative journalist And I think the third thing that people really kind of forget about is just general leadership, right? You can't be the sales guy that's like protecting your salespeople's OTE. Like people can sniff that out a mile away. You have to kind of elevate beyond. So I really do think that the typical path of in some cases, the path of a CRO and someone who's only been a net new logo seller, who might be the best salesperson in the world, just like the IC movement to the manager is not always successful. That's a mistake. You got to look at someone who has a perspective on the whole thing, and is very, very data driven.
Well, I'm super happy that founder gave that question, because I think that was such a great answer. And I would venture to guess like 70% of CROs today probably fit that archetype of like net new logo. That's what they've done. And that's why you see a pretty high turnover rate in the role. So everything you're saying resonates very, very deeply. And I hope everyone listening takes that to heart. All right, final two questions. Always keep them the same. They're intentionally vague. But there's a lot of things we hold on to, a lot of best practices that we are very slow to give up. Question is, what is one widely held belief that CROs believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
So it's somewhat related to what I said in the beginning. The way that I've organized my team at Cloudinary, I have a VP of new logo and I have a VP of customer growth. And they're different, and that's super intentional. I think that it's having respect for the craft and the practice of account management that includes upsell and cross-sell and renewal is incredibly important. It's a sales role, but it's different. A story that I like to tell is my first job here ever was at this company called Equilar. Dave Chun, shout out. Catherine Jung, shout out. These are all like great mentors of mine and friends of mine still. Catherine was the VP of sales, and I did report to her. But when I was running account management, and when we would hire people trying to figure out if they should go into VP, if they should go into sales or account management, we had this like personality test they would do, and then they would match the results to either me or her at the time. And one of the highest indicators that you belonged on the sales side versus the account management side was your level of impatience, right? Like if you were like super impatient, you should go to Catherine's side. And if you had a little bit, because on the account management side, you have to be a seller, but you have to be patient enough to do all the account management stuff and the check-in stuff as well. On the flip side, you can't just have net new logo sellers doing account management either, right? It's a sales role, but it's an account management role. And I think trying to lump them all into one thing and think they're the same it's like, I don't know, I feel it pains me. Like, I just think it's the wrong thing to do. And what will often happen is you will see that account management function and the customer side suffer, because the glory is often on the net new logo side. And you really got to make sure that your customers are good and that you're taking care of them and you're not just selling to them, like you're serving them as well. So separating them and having distinct functions between the two is not something I think a lot of companies do, but I think it's super important.
Mm-hmm. I've seen firsthand and been part of organizations that did make this transition, and it had a huge and almost immediate impact. Follow-up question to that. Because we get a lot of startups, earlier stage companies, when do you think it's time to pull those two things apart? Is there a stage? Is there a ARR number? Is there an employee number? To your best guess.
It's interesting. It's almost opposite in a way, because I think what a lot of companies do, well, I guess it depends on who's leading that sales function. So, like, for example, what a lot of times you see happen is you have a VP of sales who's hired at a startup and they start to build a sales team, and then at some point the sales team can't take all of that anymore, right? That's when you need the post-sale. You need the old Allison Metcalfe of 2012, right? That would come in and build that post-sale function. And I would challenge you at that point that rather than just putting that under the VP of sales, that you actually hire someone and have them be a peer to the VP of sales that is thinking about post-sale at the executive level. And because otherwise it feels like an afterthought. So I would say right away, right? Like, And then maybe you need a CRO later that sits over the top of them. But I do think that the tipping point that people make a mistake is like, oh, we're a startup and now sales is doing everything and they can't handle everything anymore. And we need someone to come in and do post-sale and lump them under the VP of sales. And it's just so different, right? So I would say like do it earlier and have someone that has a more, and by the way, like this is a craft, right? Like I just hired this woman, Julia Shapiro, who I worked at LiveRamp, who came over to build to take on our post-sale selling organization. The way she talks about the numbers she talks about, the leading indicators she talks about, like the whole language about account management and renewals and upsell and cross-sell expansion is wildly different from net new logo. So maybe controversially, I would argue do it the second you think you need a post-sale kind of situation, because if you don't, you're going to mess it up right away, right? So just separate it and give it the respect it deserves right from the get-go.
Yeah. I love that right from the jump. Okay, final question. What is one tactic or strategy that is actively working for you right now at Cloudinary?
Well, I would say if you can have a PLG motion, I would strongly recommend that. It really helps to have people that you have a product that people can buy on their own and that want to buy themselves for sure. I think, I don't know that I have anything like super controversial or new to say. Like we have a lot of success from word of mouth. Word of mouth is really, really important to us. So we spend a lot of time thinking about our brand and our brand perception and the experience people have with us. That might be counterintuitive to a lot of very product techie led startups that are just very focused on their product, but really thinking about the experience and making sure that you're understanding like the outcomes that you're driving and telling those stories as much as you possibly can. That moves the needle more than marketing automation, more than marketing programs, more than webinars. Just like flooding the world with stories of what you're doing for your customers is the most important thing. And I know that's really hard because not all customers will do case studies and what have you. But I would say if you can't get those stories from your customers, I don't know that I would want to be the CRO of that company, right? Like I really, it's really hard even if they're unbranded, like if you can't get people to talk about what your product has done, that's going to be a pretty tough place to be. So really, really focusing on the outcomes you're driving for your customers and shouting them from the rooftops as loud as you can, I think is critical.
Yeah, I love that. It feels like we're in the era of kind of word of mouth. Social proof is more important than ever. That's what buyers are looking for and want. Well, Allison, thank you so much. I know I've kept you a little bit over, and I know you're an incredibly busy woman, but I appreciate you spending the time with the listeners today. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And for any listeners who might want to follow along on your journey, are you on X? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you hiring some folks? Where can people find you?
I'm on X at Allison and Metcalfe. I tweet mostly about the Oakland A's though and baseball. I don't really
Love
tweet it because I'm a baseball coach. I coach my son's baseball. LinkedIn, and I will be hiring soon. I'm always looking and happy to talk to good folks.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, and to our listeners, thank you. We will see you next week. I say it every week, but listening's one thing, executing's totally different. Hopefully, we gave you some ideas and tactics that you can bring into your organization, and I will see you next week.